Hello and welcome to the Bucknuts Happy Hour. This is sort of a March Madness edition, though we're going to talk mostly football here today. I'm Patrick Murphy, and if you're watching this, you can see I'm here with Dave Biddle. Dave, how we doing on this? We're recording this on Thursday, the first day of the NCAA Tournament. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's one of the best sports days of the year. Some people say it's the best. Today and tomorrow, it's wall-to-wall college basketball. I'm in, millions of Americans. I have a regular bracket filled out, so I'm in a pool, but I'm also in a player pool, which I highly recommend.
I've heard about this.
Obviously, it's too late for people to do it now, but like next year, just keep it in mind. Yeah. So what we do is we draft 10 players, and from any team you want, we have a draft, and then those are your 10 players. And then you have to balance it with, and it's just based on how many points they score. It's just based on how many points they score. So, I don't need to get too far into the weeds, but I highly recommend doing a player pool. We do 10 players and there's 10 total teams. So 100 guys get drafted. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I actually asked a buddy of mine if he could sub for my soccer team on Tuesday, and he's like, "No, I've got a NCAA tournament draft." And I was like, "What the heck is that?" He explained it all to me. It does sound like a fun idea. I am actually at Zaftig, Italian brewery. I've been recorded here before, but I figured get to the bar now before the chaos starts. I also have a soccer game to watch later, so get there, do this from here. I've got one of their fine beers here for the happy hour. What are you drinking, Dave? Anything?
Nothing yet. Just
waiting for the games to start.
Water. Just water so far.
All right, let's dive into the football because that's what people are mostly here for, not to talk about the March Madness, the men's March Madness tournament that the team did not make. Dave, last week we kicked off spring practice. We're now on a hiatus because these kids need to go on spring break, have a good time. We were both there on Tuesday. We talked about that last week on the happy hour. Thursday, you handled it on your own as Steve and I were in Chicago covering the Buckeyes run. You talked wide receivers and linebackers, including Brian Hartline. We've written a handful of things on this already, but was there any one or two things that stood out to you initially, just generally, and then we'll get more into the weeds with the various positions?
Yeah, I would say that the second-year wide receivers, the guys entering their second year, the rising sophomores, rising redshirt freshmen, they've been put on notice by Ryan Day. And usually Brian Hartline's maybe a little bit more harsh, I would say. He wasn't even quite as harsh as Ryan Day was. I mean, and I don't know if you thought Ryan Day's comments were harsh, but he definitely put the second-year wide receivers on notice. There's no doubt about that. And talked up the true freshmen. That's the other point I wanted to make, along with the second-year guys, is they're really impressed with the freshmen that have enrolled early. And then you still have Brandon Ennis coming in, who some might think might be the best of the group. But they really like the early enrollee wide receiver group. And we'll see. I definitely think at least one of the sophomore wide receivers will transfer after spring, and we'll see who that is. But I fully expect a wide receiver and then one of the third or fourth year offensive lineman that's really not in the mix. I expect one of those guys to transfer as well.
Yeah, I wrote about that exact topic of the second-year wide receivers yesterday, and looking into this, between Caleb Brown, Keon Grays, Caleb Burton, and Kojo Antwi, they played a combined 67 total snaps last year, caught 2 passes for 7 yards. So, and that was kind of the point of my story is the last 4 years prior to last season, there's been a freshman wide receiver who's stepped up by at least the end of the year. We saw it with Chris Olave late against Michigan in the Big Ten championship game, Garrett Wilson, Julian Fleming, Marvin Harrison Jr., and none of those guys did that. Now, some of that may be because of guys staying healthy for the most part, though Jackson Smith-Njigba was obviously out most of the season, and just the talent in the room. But the fact that we didn't see much of those guys, I think speaks to what Ryan Day, like you said, is talking about with these wide receivers. And then, you have an opportunity now this spring with Mecca Buka out, Julian Fleming out, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Xavier Johnson both not limited, but Ryan Day said they're going to be smart with those guys given they've played a lot of football. But then you add in these 3 freshmen that are already on campus, and it's an interesting situation. I would not be surprised, like you said, Dave, if one of these guys were to elect by the end of spring to go elsewhere, because they are very talented. They were all top 30 players at their position coming out of high school. And so there's certainly reason to believe that these guys can play at this level, but it's almost Ohio State falling a bit of a victim to its own success in the wide receiver room because you just have so much talent and you keep bringing in the talent. And Brian Heartland did mention, this was no different than when Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka were pushing Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. The difference is those guys found a way to get on the field a little bit their freshman year, and this class didn't. So if you had to guess, Dave, is there one that you think has, I guess, let's put it this way. Of those four, is there one guy that you think seems more of a lock to be a Buckeye that can contribute here down the road as opposed to the other end of the spectrum in transferring? Who might have the most success of those four in your mind?
Yeah, I would guess Caleb Brown. And if I had to guess who's going to transfer, maybe I'd go with the other Caleb Burton. But I think Caleb Brown, based on
who may have gotten hurt, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think he already. I don't know how much in the plans he was going to be. Hopefully, it's not a serious injury. Very nice young man. He just was a big time recruit. And if he's not in the plans, he's a guy that I could see, transferring if he doesn't feel like he's in the plans after spring. Now, if he's hurt, different story because maybe he's thought he'd be in the plans. But if he's able to finish off spring healthy and he's not in the plans, then that's a kid I could see looking elsewhere. I'll go with Caleb Brown because, talking to Heartline, I asked about Caleb Brown and what his role could be. And I said, could he help in the slot? And he said, yeah, if he earns, a role on the offense, it'll be in the slot. That's where he can help. He's a converted running back from high school. For those who don't know, he was recruited as a wide receiver. When I say converted running back, he was a running back in high school who was recruited all along as a wide receiver. So he can help in the slot. Will that be this year? Probably not, unless there's injuries to guys ahead of him. But he's a guy that can help in the slot. But Brian Heartland made it clear he's a guy that can really help on special teams, like as a return man, on coverage units. So they feel like there's definitely not just a role, but perhaps a big role for Caleb Brown on special teams. And then, that could lead into, we'll see, maybe a significant role on offense down the line. I don't foresee that happening this year. Keon Grays is a guy that's filled out. He enrolled early last year, was a high school All-American and came in about 170 pounds. He's about 185. He's really filled out. Not a big guy, but still, you could definitely tell that he spent over a year working with Mickey Marotti in that strength program. So I could see him maybe carving out a role in the future. Again, it's going to be really tough this year. The only reason Marvin Harrison Jr. even played as a true freshman is because those guys sat out the Rose Bowl. I mean, think about it. He wouldn't have even seen the field. He might be the best receiver we've seen come through here, and he wouldn't have even seen the field at all as a true freshman if it wasn't for those guys sitting out the Rose Bowl. I mean, Garrett Wilson played a decent amount as a true freshman. Olave didn't play until the Michigan game, really, his freshman year. I mean, it's tough. Brian Heartline, if those guys stay healthy, I mean, it's going to be tough sledding, not just for the second-year guys, but Jaden Ballard is a third-year guy. He could be on the outside looking in unless there's injuries. In fact, I think he will be. Brian Heartline's pretty much proven if you're not in the top 3 or 4, you're not going to play unless, it's garbage time. So if Marvin Harrison, Emeka Egbuka, Julian Fleming, Xavier Johnson stay healthy, those are going to be your 4. Everybody else is going to be outside looking in, including those true freshmen that they like, unless they completely do something different this year, which now Brian Heartline's the offensive coordinator. I don't see him, switching his philosophy. Now, he doesn't come out and say that that's his philosophy, but he doesn't need to. We have years of proof. Like I said, I just went through all these big-time receivers that have come through here, and some that are still here. It's hard to get on the field as a true freshman, and it's really hard to get on the field at wide receiver for Ohio State. It's really hard to get on the field if you're not in that top 3 or 4. So we'll see what happens. They're stacked at wide receiver. It's a great problem to have. And those true freshmen, I mean, guys like Noah Rogers, Brandon Ennis when he gets here, Carnell Tate, Bryson Rogers, those guys, I think, at least 2, maybe 3 of them are going to be really good players. But, be patient, Buckeye fans. They're behind some really, really stud players this year, especially with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka.
I think it's interesting what you were just saying about Heartline, because when he first stepped into that wide receiver coach role, it was the year where they did play 6-ish receivers, really 4 starting receivers in Terry McLaurin, Paris Campbell, Johnny Dixon, and KJ Hill, and then Benjamin Victor and Austin Mack kind of featured in a little bit at the end there. But they haven't done that as much recently, despite having even more talent. And Heartland's talked about it, like you said, Dave, that the guys that deserve to play are going to play. He was a receiver that played at Ohio State, and he wanted to be on the field as much as possible. So he understands where, look, if you earn your way into those starting 3 spots, why not keep him out there as long as you can go? But what makes that even more impressive on Heartland's part is, yeah, they've had guys that have transferred. They've had Jamison Williams. They had Mookie Cooper. Guys leave the program. But for the most part, these guys have stayed, got better, and waited their time. I mean, Julian Fleming, whether you agree with the ranking or not at this point, was the number 1 ranked receiver in the country. He's going into his senior year, and only last year did he really have like a legitimate role, but he's stayed. Now, injuries have certainly played a part in his career, but for the most part, Heartland has had success despite not rotating as many guys, which to me is a positive for the program, because guys are willing to come in, they're willing to compete, and they're willing to wait. And like you just said with that freshman class, they may have to do that despite how talented they are, I think. But speaking of that freshman class, what about these guys stand out? I know we haven't seen a ton, and Heartland didn't talk a ton about the freshmen, but in your mind, what's the most impressive about this group coming in, which I think 3 of the 4 guys are top 10 players. What stands out about them to you?
Yeah, and only Bryson Rogers is not top 10 wide receiver, and they really like him as well. He's got great speed. Yeah. He's probably underrated. He was a 3-star when they landed him. Everybody's like, oh, wait a minute, Heartland is going out of his way to get this kid. Maybe he's a little better than what we think. And he's the lowest rated of the 4. Yeah, I mean, I love, even though he's not here yet, I love Brandon Ennis's film. I think he's going to be a perfect fit for the slot. Again, eventually, you never know. I'm saying these guys, down the line is when they're going to make their mark. You never know. You never know. Maybe one of these guys will play a lot as a true freshman, but Noah Rogers is a guy that I really like. He's every bit of 6'2" out there. I mean, he reminds me a little bit of, I'm not saying he's going to play corner and also return kicks and do a little bit of everything. He reminds me a little bit of Chris Gamble when I see him out there, the way he moves and his size, not extremely big, but also, tall enough, just has that football player vibe about him. And, he's a playmaker. I like Carnell Tate. These guys look like they're like 2nd or 3rd year players, not guys that should still be in high school. These guys should still be in high school, technically. So they really stand out. I mean, Noah Rogers to me and Carnell Tate, they look more like grown men than they do kids. And technically, they're still kids. So, yeah, that's the thing that stands out. I mean, it's a tremendous group. Last year wasn't quite up to Heartland standards, and it was still a good group of 4. This is why Heartland's the best at what he does as far as recruiting wide receivers. This group of 4, I have very high expectations for them.
Let's talk about the returning guys, even though people know a lot about them. Marvin Harrison Jr. was talking about how he feels like you can always get better. And I think the question is, like, what does better look like coming off of a season that he just had? Heartline, as you wrote yesterday, believes anybody with eyes could see that he should have won the Biletnikoff. I think if you look at his and Jalen Hyatt from Tennessee's stats, that they're pretty comparable. Now, I think you can make the argument either way. But if Marvin Harrison Jr., refines what he does, and Heartland talked about like getting better is chasing the guys that are beyond the program at this point, and guys in the NFL, and working on the things that you're already doing, enhancing them and stuff like that. But like, How in your mind does a Marvin Harrison Jr. put together a better season than what he did as a sophomore?
Yeah, I mean, Coach Heartland talked about it and went through like a little bit of everything. Like Marvin himself was a little bit more direct. He said, again, you get better at route running, little things like, not that they're little things. Route running is obviously a big part of being a wide receiver, but he's already a good route runner. He can refine that. There's different things he can do. What I found interesting is he pinpointed one thing in particular. He wants to be a bigger threat after catching the ball. And, if you're an Ohio State fan, you got to be thrilled about that because he's already pretty damn good at that. And that's the thing he wants to be elite at. And you're right. I mean, you talk to Brian Heartline and he's saying, Marvin Harrison is not trying to just be the best wide receiver in college. He's chasing guys like his father. He wants to one day be in Canton, Ohio in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. That's what he's chasing. And not that he's not focused on Ohio State right now. I mean, he's definitely where another quote that Heartline likes to use is he is where his feet are, and be where your feet are. So Marvin's locked in is the feeling I get for what's going to be his final year at Ohio State, and Yeah, I mean, just enjoy it, Buckeye fans, because he's special. We've seen a lot of special ones come through here. You got guys that I really respect, like Joel Klatt. I shouldn't say guys. I think he's the only one that I've heard actually say this. But you have a guy that I really respect, like Joel Klatt, who says Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be the best wide receiver in the NFL in 5 years. And Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, who I hang out with all the time, they don't agree with that. Okay, I never hang out with them. But they don't agree with that. But think about that. If that is even close to true, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be the best wide receiver in the NFL in 5 years. Just because Joel Klatt says it doesn't mean it's going to be true. But let's say he's never even close to that. He might be the best that we've seen come through here. And we've seen tons of great wide receivers come through here. So he's special. And we don't talk about Emeka Egbuka enough. I mean, he's coming off he was over 1,000 yards. You know, he's electric after the catch. I mean, those two are going to be absolutely – I mean, they were dynamite this past year, but it was always kind of the Jackson Smith-Njigba cloud over the wide receiver room. Like, is he coming back? Is he not coming back? What are we going to do with this? Coming into the season, they had all kinds of stuff planned for Jackson Smith-Njigba. This year, hopefully they can stay healthy. And those guys are just going to even top what they did last year, in my opinion. I mean, it's going to be tough, I guess, when you don't have C.J. Stroud, but I firmly believe whoever wins the quarterback battle is going to have not just a good year, but a great year. Not necessarily Heisman finalists, although it won't surprise me if they are, but like first team All-Big Ten type, second team All-Big Ten at the very worst. I think either Kyle McCord or Devin Brown, whoever wins that job, and I think it's going to be Kyle McCord, will have a great year. Not the C.J. Stroud level, but short story long, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka are going to be even better than what they were last year.
I wanted to touch on Emeka Egbuka, so you took us right there because, look, you look at his numbers, and I think this just gets lost in what Marvin Harrison did. 74 catches to Marvin Harrison Jr.'s 77. He had 1,151 receiving yards. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 1,263. 14 touchdowns for Marvin Harrison, 10 for Emeka Egbuka. Emeka Egbuka was playing with what I think is a shoulder injury that he had surgery on after the season. That's why he's not out in the spring. A healthy Emeka Egbuka, if he's fully healthy for a season, I mean, he had almost the same numbers as Marvin Harrison Jr. He could have been in that Biletnikoff conversation too. Now, it's very rare that you see two guys mentioned in that light. But look, I think we aren't talking about him enough, as you kind of said there, Dave, because again, this was the top-ranked receiver, if I remember correctly, in his class. He has shown the ability to do some pretty impressive things. If he's healthy, if Marvin Harrison Jr. stays healthy, what do defenses do? I mean, when you have those two guys, plus, you add in Julian Fleming, you can bring Xavier Johnson in. We talked about some of those younger guys. What do you do with these receivers if you're opposing secondary?
I mean, good luck. You better have one of the best secondaries in the country and a really good front, too, that's going to get pressure on the quarterback. And then maybe that's what you're thinking if you're a defensive coordinator. If you've got a really good front, maybe if you have like a decent secondary but a really good front, you got to get after this new offensive line for Ohio State. I mean, they got both guards coming back, but 2 new tackles and a new center. And that's going to be interesting. If I think if Josh Fryer stays healthy, I think he's going to do well at left tackle, but I don't like the depth there at all. We all know they went after offensive tackles, plural, in the transfer portal and didn't get any offensive tackles. They did get Vic Cutler, who can play center or guard. I mean, he can play tackle. He played left tackle last year at Louisiana Monroe, but he's not going to play left tackle at Ohio State at 6'3". I guess it's good he could play in an emergency out there. But the point is, I don't like the depth of tackle. Now, I will say at right tackle, I do like Tegra Shabola and Zen Mahalski. But again, I don't love the depth overall. We're talking about they've got Josh Fryer at left tackle, and they got a pretty good battle at right tackle. But those guys don't have much experience. And then what if they have injuries there? Then they're in big trouble. So we'll see what happens. But, yeah, I think Ohio State's going to be electric on offense this year. I believe in Justin Fry as an offensive line coach, so that'll help. But, yeah, I mean, it's going to be really, really tough sledding for defenses unless you've got a great secondary and or a great front that can get after this offensive line and put pressure on McCord or perhaps number 33, Devin Brown. But, again, I think I'm to the point now where I'm pretty – I think most people are here anyway. I was kind of a little bit more skeptical, I guess, during the season last year who would be the starting quarterback this coming year. Now, I'll be very, very surprised if it's not Kyle McCord. And I say that as somebody who likes Devin Brown a lot. I just think I'll be surprised if it's not Kyle McCord. I'll just leave it at that.
Excuse me. This beer's messing with my digestive system there. Let's flip over to the defensive side of the ball and the linebackers. It's a similar situation with the two returning starters and Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers back, and a lot of talent, some rather young behind them. Right now, Tommy Eichenberg is not working in spring, so that gives an opportunity to some of those guys to step into a bigger role in practice. Is there a way in your mind that Ohio State figures out how to get a CJ Hicks, some of these other linebackers onto the field more than they did a year ago? Or is this once again going to be the Tommy Eichenberg Steele Chambers show for the most part in 2023?
It's going to be the Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers show again.
I think so too.
CJ Hicks is the one guy that I could see them mixing in a little bit and taking Steele Chambers off the field. But again, we're going to hear a lot of lip service about that. Yeah, we're going to rotate more in the back seven. No, they won't. Jim Knowles does not rotate in the back seven, okay? He's got the same philosophy that Brian Heartland does. We were talking about this earlier. What did Brian Heartland say? And you alluded to this. Brian Heartland says, listen, if I have to take Marvin Harrison Jr. off the field, that means you got to go in there and play just as good as him. Or why am I taking him off the field for you, right? So that's Jim Knowles' philosophy too. Why am I taking Steele Chambers off the field? Now, they might feel like, okay, CJ Hicks is now to the point where he's giving you it, because it's not like Steele Chambers is like an All-American. No one's playing a middle linebacker other than Tommy. I mean, that's Tommy. Doesn't matter if Tommy has broken hands, which he did, and like a shoulder injury, which he did, and all this other stuff. Tommy's not coming off the field unless he's got like a torn ACL, and he probably would tape it up, or something. Put a little dirt on it, rub some dirt on it and get it back in there. So Tommy's not coming off the field. And if I had to bet, I think CJ Hicks next year will be a starter, meaning 2024, but we'll have fans that are hoping to see him out there a lot this year will probably be disappointed. I don't see him maybe playing as much as people think as a sophomore, but I certainly think he's going to be a stud down the road, and will be a starter in 2024. And maybe he will mix in and, rotate with Steele Chambers a little bit. But Pat, I'll believe that when I see it. Knowles' philosophy is the starters are starters for a reason, both the linebackers and the secondary. So no, I think we're going to see this. And by the way, Tommy and Steele are now a year older. They've been in the system now. Like, theoretically, they should be even better. Now, CJ Hicks, you could say that, players make their biggest jump from freshman to sophomore. So he'll be better too. I get that. But I mean, they didn't really take Steele off the field that much last year. We know Tommy's not leaving the field. So it's now with the, basically now 2 years of starting under his belt, because he was kind of a starter the previous year too. Yeah, I think Steele's probably going to, play just as much, maybe more than he did last year.
Yeah, I'm looking at the snap counts courtesy of our good friend Dan Hope over at 11 Warriors. And Tommy played 761 snaps. Steele played 687. Then it was Cody Simon, 233. But what's interesting is early in the season, Steele and Cody Simon, now some of these games obviously got out of hand, but like the Notre Dame game, for instance, Steele played 26 snaps. Cody Simon played 25. They
were still trying to figure it out then. Yep.
Yeah. Toledo, Wisconsin. Wisconsin was really the game where Steele took over, 48-16. And from there, he dominated the snap counts for the rest of the season. Cody Simon's interesting because I thought when he had his opportunity, he played all right last year. It was just a matter of Steele played better. And so I'll be interested to see. I do agree. I think you have to find some kind of role for CJ Hicks after he didn't play a single defensive snap last year. And I think he's a patient kid. I don't not worried about him bolting from this program, especially being an Ohio guy. They've talked maybe that he could play some at the Jack. I think that's interesting. I'd like to see what that looks like with a linebacker playing it. But I'm still not entirely convinced that you need a Jack role as much at a place like Ohio State as you did at some of Jim Knowles' other stops. But that's a whole different conversation. But I do think getting CJ Hicks on the field is important at some points this season. Maybe not as important as a guy like Sonny Styles, but I do think he can impact a defense. And this isn't a defense that can just stick to what it did last year. In the biggest games, they weren't good enough. And not that I'm putting that on either of those two linebackers, but you got to find ways to get your best talent on the field. And I think CJ Hicks is among that. If you look at any of the other guys, where should Buckeye, aside from the few that we've mentioned, where should Buckeye fans maybe be excited about what's coming? Because there is some depth there, but it's not a lot of names that we know besides the three that we've mentioned.
At linebacker?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really the four, that we've mentioned, right? I mean, so you got Tommy, you got Steele, CJ Hicks, and then Cody Simon. Those are going to be the four. Right now, I mean, Cody Simon has an opportunity now to rep at middle linebacker in spring with Tommy missing spring. Reed Carrico, they said they're moving him around to different spots. And I didn't get a chance to talk to Reed because there was so much going on. We had wide receivers and linebackers and Heartland all at the same time. And it was just like very chaotic. And I spent most of my time with I was with Heartline for the entire 26 minutes. It was so good. But
understandable.
But I did see like some of what Reed said, and I give him credit. He's being patient. He's now entering his third year. Really hasn't played much. He was a big time recruit from Ironton, smaller school, but really good football tradition down there on the river, Ohio River, as Jay Book calls them, River Rats. He's allowed to say that because Jay Book's from Portsmouth. Yeah, so we'll see what happens with Reed Carrico. He's another guy I'm keeping an eye on. Gabe Powers now entering his second year. He's definitely filled out. He was telling me last year he came in, even though he's listed at 230. He said I was really like 215 when I enrolled, and now he looks like he's more like 230, 235. I think he's listed at 235. So we'll see. Again, Gabe Powers is another guy I don't think is going to be in the plans this year unless they have like a bunch of injuries. But he's a guy that definitely has a lot of talent. So. Those are the guys, but, we'll see. I mean, Gabe Powers and Reed Carrico and CJ Hicks, those are the guys that like spring that it's important for them to show that they, CJ Hicks can like, even if they're not planning on him having a big role. Now, Knowles talked about it a little bit because we asked him, it sounds like they're going to try and find a role for CJ Hicks. As you said, they need to. I agree with that because he's so talented. Some of those other guys, I mean, maybe Reed Carrico is not in the plans, but he's going to show him this spring. Okay, well, now we got to find a way to get Reed on the field. Or is Reed going to enter his third year and still not get on the field other than special teams? But probably the latter, right? Probably the latter. But hopefully he stays patient. He still has 3 years of eligibility left. So, yeah, I mean, they've got some decent depth there, I guess. They got Arvell Reese coming in. That helps. When you only play 2 linebackers, you don't need a ton of depth. Yeah, I mean, I think they're in a good spot there overall. I mean, Tommy coming back is huge. That's huge. For some reason, Whippler was not on my radar. Tommy, I was a little worried about. I was thinking he'd come back. His brother was in a similar situation. He came back for a 5th year at Notre Dame. They don't play the same position. But Tommy's a guy that could have been like, he wouldn't have gone early. Middle linebackers don't go early unless you can run like a crazy 40 or, you can jump out of the gym. That's not Tommy. But he would have been probably a 3rd round pick, something like that. Somebody would have wanted a tough, hard-nosed guy like that in the 3rd round, no later than that, I would think. So Tommy coming back is absolutely huge. So I feel pretty good about the linebacking group.
Speaking of guys who came back when maybe they could have gone to the NFL, James Laurenitis is essentially the linebackers coach of this team. In title, that's not what he's listed as. He's probably not getting paid what linebackers coach is, but comes back to Ohio State from Notre Dame where he spent 1 season. We touched on him when he was first hired, but the impact that he can make on this room, he's still learning as a coach. He's a young coach, which is why he isn't, he might be the full-time linebackers coach if they had unlimited positions, but he's going to learn under Jim Knowles, but he's essentially going to run this room. What kind of impact do you think he makes just being James Laurenitis? We can get to the coaching, what he can add as a coach, but like being James Laurenitis, the multiple-time All-American, won a bunch of awards, the fact that he's back in that building working with these guys, how much of an impact can that make on these guys, especially maybe some of those younger guys you mentioned who could use some of his wisdom on this defense?
The instant respect factor. I mean, these guys, this is what they want to be. I mean, Knowles was talking about like in the linebacker room, there's a picture of James Laurinaitis, a huge picture of him in there, All-American picture.
It's got to be weird, right? If you
AJ Hawkins, stuff like that. Knowles loves it. Like you mentioned, and James talked about this too. I mean, it's clear he is the linebackers coach. Like, don't get caught up in titles. Even James said kind of like, even though I'm technically a GA, it's kind of a throwaway line. It's like, yeah, anybody. I think most people listening to the show probably know that, or watching the show already know that. If you don't know it, I mean, James Laurenitis is the linebacker coach, as Pat just said. I mean, it's not like he's like a graduate assistant. Like, he is in title, but he'll be running the linebacker room. And Jim Knowles will be in there as well, but just gives Jim Knowles a little bit more freedom. to look at the entire defense. Not that he already did, and just gives him a little bit more freedom. You got a guy like James Laurenitis in there that this is what these guys want to be at Ohio State and in the NFL as well. I mean, he's the all-time, I believe, still leads your Rams all-time in tackles, the all-time tackler. For the St. Louis Rams when he was there. Now, I believe they play in LA. I can't remember. Kidding. Were they in the Super Bowl a couple years ago? And that's my Bengals. By the way, shout out to Orlando Brown Jr. You made a great decision to come to Cincinnati. Love you, big guy. Protecting Joe Burrow's blind side. So,
how often do you hang out with him?
Yeah, exactly. 6'8", 370. I love it. James Laurinaitis, I absolutely love it. I didn't like that he went to Notre Dame. I was like, I know him and Marcus Freeman are like buddies, but I was just like, it's too bad they can't find a role at Ohio State for him. Well, 1 year later, Ryan Day did, and I absolutely love it. I think he's going to, get the best out of those guys, and he brings that instant respect factor.
Well, if you've ever talked to James, I'm sure many people have heard him when he did stuff for BTN or locally in Columbus when he was on The Fan. But if you've ever talked football with that kid, just talk to him in general. I mean, he commands the room. He's great at that. Just you can see why he was middle linebacker, captain of the defense type of player. But if you talked football with him, I mean, most guys who played at that level can talk ball and talk at a higher level than probably both you and I put together. But James explains it really well. He explains it in a way that I think he understands, probably because he's done the TV stuff, he's done the radio stuff, and he's also been in an NFL locker room. He can explain it to somebody who's just getting started with the sport. Obviously, that doesn't matter for Buckeyes, but he can also talk it at the highest level. And one of the things he talked about was realizing that the freshman coming in, maybe not, you have to handle that differently than the guy who's been there 3-4 years, right? And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how that helps with the development. I think every coach has to come upon that at some point in their career, but I was impressed that he is already grasping that, look, you can't just be you can't handle it the same way you would have had you been talking to your boys in the NFL locker room about, okay, here's what we need to do. You have to sometimes dumb it down a little bit. That's not the right term, but simplify it a little bit as guys grow and develop into that. And I think that's going to help guys. I really think he can be a big tool for Tommy Eichenberg. And, we were just talking about how does Marvin Harrison Jr. build on the year he had. Tommy Eichenberg was the first guy for 100+ tackles since, I believe, Raekwon McMillan. Is that right? Does that sound right to you?
Sounds right to me. I mean, clearly that was the best middle linebacker play we've seen since Raekwon. Yep.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's correct. So, if you're Tommy, how do you then build on that? Well, you talk with James Laurenitis, who's in your position room now. Anything else from any of the linebacker video or any linebacker interviews that stood out to you? I know you were all over the place that day because we left you high and dry, but anything else that people should note from what those guys said?
Well, I have a mea culpa. I gave you and Steve Hellwagon all kinds of hell. I'm like, why are you guys going to Chicago to cover this basketball team just to see them lose to Wisconsin in the game of shame? And they make it all the way to the semifinals. You guys didn't bring enough underwear. You're turning your underwear inside out, and it's disgusting. I'm like, just go to the store.
What underwear?
What's wrong with you guys?
What underwear?
Going commando. It was funny. There was actually a thread on Bucknuts about it. We need to GoFundMe for Steve and Pat. They need new clothes, and there's no way they pack for 5 days. But no, what stood out? I mean, really, not much other than what we've already talked about. We're going to get, again, there was lip service about, we might, rotate a little bit more this year. No, they won't. I'll believe it when I say it. Again, with the caveat, maybe CJ Hicks. But as you pointed out, early in the season, they were still trying to figure out who the will was. They knew Tommy was the Mike. No doubt about that from the get. They knew that last spring. They were still trying to figure out, was it Steele or was it Cody? Was it Steele or Cody? And Steele ended up winning that job. So, I mean, CJ Hicks is now going to have to get past, even though Cody Simon's playing middle linebacker, we know he can play will. That's what he played last year. So CJ Hicks is not only going to have to beat out Steele Chambers for playing time, he's also going to have to beat out Cody Simon. Now, CJ Hicks is a former five-star. He's absolutely talented enough to do that. Again, if I had to bet, I think CJ Hicks will be a starter in 2024. Won't have a big role in the defense this year unless Steel Chambers gets hurt. But it won't shock me, I guess, if CJ Hicks, can push Steel Chambers for playing time. But again, I'll believe it when I see it because Jim Knowles has the same philosophy as Brian Heartland. As I said, the starters are starters for a reason. If I'm going to take this guy off the field, you got to be just as good as him. And maybe CJ Hicks will be just as good as Steel Chambers or better. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, this is what the good problem you want to have. It's what Ohio State's had for quite a few years now on offense. You want to have this at defensive positions. This is, you look at Georgia's roster and guys get hurt, the next guy steps in, or the guy leaves for the NFL or graduates, the next guy steps in. This is what you want on defense. You want to have these issues where you can talk about the depth at these positions, and hopefully the Buckeyes are starting to build that on the defensive side of the ball. Because as Steve Hellwagon has pointed out, there hasn't been enough talent paid to the defensive side of the ball really the last few years. I mean, there's definitely dudes. We can talk about CJ Hicks. We can talk about Sonny Styles, the emergence of some of the guys, but there hasn't been the consistent quality in terms of the recruiting on that side of the ball. You hope that changes here soon. And I think you're starting to see that become a bigger focus now that that's bitten the Buckeyes here multiple times. All right, Dave, let's shift over unless you have anything more football you want to hit on this one. And let's quickly do some March Madness thoughts. You do a show about Vegas and odds and betting and all that stuff. So I assume you are the expert. Who is going to win the NCAA tournament?
First of all, I'm definitely not an expert. And you don't have to say Vegas anymore, man. You can just say Columbus. You can say
that's Ohio. True. I guess we can do it everywhere.
No, I mean, I do the same thing. It's like according to Vegas, and I have to remember according to anywhere now, right? Not anywhere, but finally Ohio is with the times. Gambling is legal. And yes, I do host a show here on 97.1 The Fan in Columbus twice a week called On the Money. And it's about sports gambling. So if you're a degenerate, you'll really like the show. If you're an upstanding individual, you probably would not like the show. And I don't have a high level of confidence in this, but I have Texas winning it all. Again, I say that like almost laughing because I don't remember it ever being this wide open. Here's another thing. I'm usually a chalk guy, and I don't apologize for it. It's worked out well for me in pools before. I'm not chalk this year. I've never done this. I don't have a 1 seed in the Final Four. Obviously, I have Texas in the Final Four. I have UConn making it as a 4. They have 4 seed. UConn as a 4 seed. I have making the Final Four. They look like the best team in the country early in the year. Maybe they can recapture it. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Purdue makes it, but I don't have Purdue making it. I have Marquette making it out of that region. And then I have Baylor upsetting Alabama in the Elite Eight. So I have Baylor, Marquette, Texas, UConn, and then I have Texas winning it all. So we'll see what happens. But here's what I'd say to the listeners and viewers out there. Definitely don't take Texas to win it all since I'm taking them because that's not going to happen if I have them winning it all. So do the opposite. Pull a George Costanza and do the opposite of what I say.
What's your biggest upset that you've got in this bracket?
Oh,
or maybe even one that you thought about.
I've got Drake making it to. I've got Drake making it to the Sweet 16. 12-seeded Drake. So I have them beating Miami, and then I have Drake beating Indiana, which frankly, neither one of those is going to be that big of an upset if they happen. I don't think that I think Miami's favored by like 2 over Drake, but just having a 12 seed in the Sweet 16. Let's see. Do I have any other like big upsets? I mean, I guess I got a 4 seed making the Final Four. I don't know if that's really considered a huge upset in UConn. We'll see what happens. But is this year the year Purdue can put it all together and actually make the Final Four? Probably not. Probably not. They're like a one-man band. They've got Zach Edey, who's a monster. If he gets in foul trouble, they're done. Their freshman guards are not going to hold up against some of these teams. So we'll see.
Well, it's always fun. I haven't filled out a March Madness bracket in years. It's sort of my feeling with gambling. Like I watch these games anyway and enjoy them so much that I would fill these out or I would bet on teams or whatever it was. And I would just get more angry about what's going on. So I stopped, I don't know, a handful of years ago. I was like, I'm not going to fill out a bracket this year. And I just enjoyed the tournament, like watching the upsets and things. Like I just enjoyed it so much more. So I haven't filled out a bracket in years. The one story that I do really like from this tournament, I don't know how it'll play out, but The Final Four is in Houston. Houston, pretty good at basketball this year. And the man calling the Final Four in Houston, whose name just escaped my mind, works for CBS.
Jim Nance?
Jim Nance. There we go.
Hello,
went
friend.
to Houston. Yeah, he went to Houston. So it would be very serendipitous if Houston at least made a run to the national championship game with Jim Nance calling his alma mater in his final NCAA tournament game. I think that would be quite the story if that were to play out that way. Honestly, I've only seen Houston play a couple times. I know they're big athletic guards, so yeah, I think there's definitely a chance.
Their best player's hurt. Now he's going to play, but Marcus Sasser has a groin injury. Now, I bet he's even going to play in there. I thought they might sit him against Northern Kentucky. You can't beat Northern Kentucky without your top player. Are you really the best team in the tournament?
Right.
But there's talk that they might not take any chances. You might say that is a chance playing him, but it's not take any no, Marcus Sasser is going to play. That would give me a little trepidation. I mean, Houston, great defensive team. You're right. They're big and athletic. Great defensive team, Kelvin Sampson. But, man, I mean, all it takes is something like that. Even if he's cleared to play, it could be like a Jackson Smith and Jigba. I know it's a different type of injury, but a lot like a hamstring. I mean, a groin injury is something you can easily re-injure. You slip and fall one time and you turn the wrong way on the court. All of a sudden, you're without your best player. That's another reason I picked Texas. I looked into it. I have Texas upsetting Houston. Houston's a really good team, but Texas, really good team as well, and their best player is not hurt. So we'll see what happens.
What do you think, if any, the impact of no Bill Self, at least to start this tournament, on the sidelines for Kansas?
I don't think there's much impact. I really don't. I mean, I think as long as they had a kid miss with back spasms. I believe it was back spasms. Who I think is going to be back. McClelland, I believe it was McClelland. I can't remember his name. It's Mick something. And I think he's going to be back for Kansas as long as they're healthy. I don't think not having Bill Self for a game or two is going to be that big of a deal. I mean, I don't think he's a great coach. I mean, he's obviously. It's kind of weird to say that, but it's like I mean, I don't need to get into all the reasons why they've landed players. We all know the backstory there. So I think they'll be fine. They recruit well, and I don't think it's necessarily Bill Self's X's and O's, which is why Kansas is good every year.
Well, and they've done this a little bit in the Big 12 tournament. He missed some time there with what's going on. So they've at least experienced him not being on the sideline in these type of games. All right. Well, unless you have any other upsets you want to throw out to the people, I think we can wrap this one up.
No, I think I'm good. I mean, I'm trying to think. Right. I do have Oral Roberts beating Duke.
Well, we know about Oral Roberts. We do know a thing or two about Oral Roberts here.
Yeah, Duke's hot, I know, but early on they weren't looking good. I didn't see much of the ACC tournament. I know they won it, so they're obviously red hot coming in. But a lot of times, as we know, that's not necessarily a good thing. Yeah. To go deep in your own conference tournament, a lot of times that can go the opposite. Like when Ohio State lost to Oral Roberts, what happened that year? They got all the way to the Big Ten championship game and lost to Illinois in overtime. Played great in the Big Ten tournament that year, Ohio State did, and then got beat by a 15 seed. So I have Oral Roberts, and that Max Abmas is still there.
Yes.
And I have Oral Roberts beating Duke. So then I see a lot of people that are experts that have Duke making it all the way to the Final Four. So I'm thinking, maybe I shouldn't have made that pick, but got to pick some 12s over 5s, right?
Yeah, I mean, Duke is as talented per player as any team in the country. I saw it up close and personal when they played Ohio State this year. And, maybe it's all finally come together for them here at the end of the season, and they made that run in the ACC tournament. But it hasn't been what you would expect from this team. I mean, they've been better than their team down the road, but it still hasn't been what anyone expected for this group. I think the talent there should be a 1-2 seed, and you see where they are at a 5 seed. So maybe it's all coming together, but again, maybe it's just not a good year. All right. Well, we're going to wrap it up. We're going to get ready. The tournament games are going to start here shortly. So I'm going to let Dave get to his watching, and I'm going to do the same. We didn't do this one live, so we don't have anyone in the comment section, but for those who watched, thank you. Please subscribe, and follow us on all of the social media accounts, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. Dave, thank you very much for taking your first day of March Madness to spend some time at the happy hour. Happy early St. Patrick's Day, the anniversary of when Ryan Day complimented my facial hair on the Zoom call.
Well, that was great. They were trying to, for those who don't know, they're trying to wrap up ours. We had a Zoom press conference with Ryan Day.
2021.
Yeah, and they were ready to wrap it up. Like, I can't remember if it was Jerry Emming or Mike Basper who was running it that day, and they were getting ready to wrap up. Like, okay, thanks everybody. And Ryan Day stopped them and said, "Can I interject? Can Patrick Murphy ask a question? He's got like the most St. Patrick's. It was on St. Patrick's Day, and he's got the most like St. Patrick's name I've ever heard. So you got a question in Ryan Day. I don't even know if you had a question queued up, but Ryan Day made sure you got a question in. I thought that was really cool. And you remember I can see you light up when you're talking about it. So yeah, that was a pretty cool moment. Yeah.
I was wearing green. The beard was pretty long at that point. And I had already asked a question, which was funny, which shows how much Ryan Day pays attention to my questions. But
I had forgotten about that too.
I'd already asked a question. Fortunately, I had multiple written down, so I was ready to go with the second. Well, I was pretty much ready to go with the second one, and but that was a fun experience. Anyway, thanks everybody again for listening. Check out Bucknuts. If you're not a subscriber, please subscribe. Recruiting, inside info, all that good stuff. Dave, appreciate it, and we'll be back next week. The Buckeyes are back out on the field. Next week's a busy week. We've got 2 days of interviews. We got Pro Day on Wednesday, so we'll have plenty of stuff. And at some point, I'll get to listen through all this linebacker stuff, and we'll write some linebacker stuff. We haven't gotten to that yet. But Dave, again, thank you very much. And Buckeye fans, Bucknutters, cheers.